Imagine walking through the heavy, wooden doors of a chamber so dark and foreboding that it seems to swallow the very light around it. The air is thick with a mixture of dampness, burning wax, and silent anticipation of suffering. Inside these walls, pain is not merely inflicted, it is weaponized, turned into a form of cruel artistry designed to break the human spirit. Welcome to the heart of the Spanish Inquisition's torture chambers, a place where fear and brutality converge in ways that challenge our understanding of human cruelty. Now, pause for a moment and ask yourself, what exactly lay behind those cold, unyielding doors? Was it justice? Retribution? Or something far more terrifying and unjust? The stories, tales passed down through centuries, speak of a darkness so profound that it could rival the very depths of hell. Victims, often innocent, were subjected to devices designed for maximum pain, their screams echoing through stone corridors. It wasn't just about punishing alleged heretics or enemies of the Church. It was about asserting absolute control, sending a message that dissent, regardless of guilt or innocence, would be crushed under the weight of relentless torment. As you stand on the threshold of this shadowy world, consider the images conjured by history. The infamous rack stretching limbs to breaking points, the strappado hoisting victims by their arms until dislocation became inevitable, waterboarding blending terror with physical agony. These methods weren't random. They followed a calculated brutality aimed at extracting confessions, often under the brutal promise that suffering would end only when secrets spilled or loyalty was broken. But the terror went deeper: psychological torment, threats of death, and the looming shadow of death itself played on every victim's mind. Many stories from those dark halls remain shrouded in mystery, yet some have survived, tales of innocence lost, of individuals coerced into false confessions, their grief echoing down the ages. What's chilling is that the line between guilt and innocence often blurred amid the screams and the shadows. Entire communities lived under the constant threat of interrogation, those accused of heresy, Jewish or Muslim backgrounds, or witchcraft, targets of not just suspicion but of systematic, state-sponsored brutality. Throughout these grim chambers' history, thousands of victims endured unspeakable horrors, sometimes in their final moments, their lives forever scarred by the invisible wounds inflicted by cold implements and the cruelty of their tormentors. The cruelty was relentless, stretching over years in some cases and resulting in countless deaths and lifelong trauma. What's more horrifying is that these horrors were often conducted in the name of divine righteousness, twisted into an excuse to wield unchecked power over human bodies and minds. This opening glimpse into the darkness is meant to stir not just curiosity, but a somber reflection on the depths of human depravity when fueled by fanaticism and authoritarian control. Although centuries have passed, the haunting images and stories remind us that beneath any veneer of righteousness, the potential for cruelty exists and can flourish when compassion is sacrificed on the altar of dogma. Stepping into this world of shadows, we confront a history that forces us to question the very nature of justice, faith, and power. In the late 15th century, Spain was a land of profound religious fervor and political upheaval. The Reconquista, a centuries-long effort to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule, was nearing its culmination with the fall of Granada in 1492. This victory marked the end of Islamic sovereignty in Spain, but it also intensified the desire for religious and cultural unity under Christianity. The Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, sought to consolidate their realms not only through territorial conquest, but through religious homogeneity, viewing their sovereignty as divinely ordained. However, they were often still viewed with suspicion, believed to secretly adhere to their original faiths, and thus posed a threat to religious unity. Amidst this climate of suspicion, the idea of a formal religious tribunal gained prominence. The Catholic Church, already a powerful institution, sought to root out heresy and enforce doctrinal orthodoxy throughout Spain. In 1478, Ferdinand and Isabella officially established the Tribunal of the Holy Office, known as the Spanish Inquisition, with the primary goal of identifying heretics, apostates, and those accused of practicing Judaism or Islam secretly. Unlike earlier forms of local ecclesiastical justice, the Inquisition was centrally organized, standardized, and backed by royal authority, giving it extraordinary powers. The religious zeal fueling the Inquisition was rooted in the belief that faith was a matter of life and death, not just spiritual salvation. Heresy was seen as a grave threat to societal cohesion and divine order. The Inquisition's purpose combined spiritual purification with political control. Maintaining Catholic dominance was essential for the stability and unity of the realm. The tribunal's methods reflected this urgency. It relied heavily on secretive investigations, surveillance, and the use of torture to extract confessions and accusations. However, as the Inquisition's power grew, so did its methods of enforcement, which increasingly involved brutal interrogations and systematic persecution. The inquisitors believed that suffering purifying the soul, and that immediate punishment would deter future heresy. The goal was not only to punish but also to ensure the spiritual salvation of the community by rooting out dirt and impurity, an obsession that ultimately led to the brutal treatment of countless individuals. The historical context of this period reveals a society gripped by fear, intolerance, and the desire for religious uniformity. The Inquisition was both a product of these sentiments and a catalyst for further brutality. It justified its actions through religious dogma, but behind the scenes, it became a tool for consolidating political power and suppressing dissent. The dark history of the Spanish Inquisition's torture chambers cannot be fully understood without examining the key figures responsible for orchestrating these brutal acts. Central among them was Tomás de Torquemada, a Dominican friar whose name has become almost synonymous with cruelty and fanaticism. Appointed Grand Inquisitor in 1483 by the Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella, Torquemada epitomized the zealous pursuit of religious purity. His unwavering conviction that heresy threatened the soul of Spain drove him to implement some of the most notorious methods of interrogation and punishment. Under his leadership, the Inquisition intensified its brutality, leading to mass executions, confessions obtained through torture, and an atmosphere of fear that gripped the entire nation. Torquemada's background reveals a man driven by fervent religious conviction. Born into a modest family, he quickly rose through the ecclesiastical ranks due to his intelligence and unwavering faith. Yet it was his zealotry, rather than theological nuance, that defined his tenure. He believed that heretics, Jews, Muslims, and anyone deviating from Catholic orthodoxy threatened the divine order of Spain, warranting harsh, often lethal measures. His strict adherence to dogma fueled a campaign of repression, culminating in the establishment of a ruthless judicial system designed not only to root out heresy, but to extract confessions that often led to executions. But Torquemada did not act alone. He led a network of inquisitors, officials, and torturers who shared his fanaticism. Behind these devices stood men whose morale seemed detached from any humanitarian concern, motivated instead by obedience, zeal, or fear of punishment themselves. Despite the brutality, much of what is known about these figures is documented through trial records, confessional transcripts, and letters sent by individuals involved in the Inquisition. These documents paint a picture of a system built on fear and control, where torture was not only justified but institutionalized as an essential part of justice. The inquisitors viewed their actions as necessary, divine punishment, to preserve the purity of faith and protect Spain's spiritual integrity. This mindset justified, in their eyes, the systematic brutality that characterized countless interrogations. Their actions achieved their intended purpose: confessions, convictions, and executions, often with little regard for innocence or fairness. However, many of these figures operate within a complex web of motivations. Some believed deeply in religious righteousness. Others sought personal power or wealth. The environment of fear created an atmosphere where disobedience was dangerous, not just for the accused but for the officials themselves. The torture chambers were sites where ideological fanaticism and personal ambition intertwined, resulting in atrocities that scarred Spain's history for centuries. Understanding these key figures is crucial because it humanizes the machinery of cruelty, revealing that behind the horrifying deeds were individuals acting under a mixture of conviction, obedience, and zealotry. Their stories serve as a stark reminder of how fanaticism can distort morality and justify inhuman acts. The torture chamber of the Spanish Inquisition was a place where unimaginable suffering was inflicted under the guise of justice. To understand the extent of its brutality, it is essential to explore the methods and the madness that defined this dark institution. The devices used were not merely tools of punishment, they were instruments designed to break the human spirit, extract confessions, and instill terror into anyone who dared oppose the Inquisition's authority. The strappado, another cruel method, involved suspending a person by their arms behind their back, often with weights attached to their feet, causing intense pain and dislocation. These practices served to disorient victims and force confessions, sometimes under duress or false accusations. Waterboarding, though less documented, was also reportedly employed. Victims were restrained and water was poured over their face, inducing the sensation of drowning, an agonizing experience that exploited primal fears. Such methods combined physical torment with psychological breakdowns, shattering victims' resolve and leaving them vulnerable to further interrogation or punishment. Beyond these infamous devices, the Inquisition employed a host of other brutal tools. The Iron Maiden, a sarcophagus-like device lined with spikes, was used both as a torture method and a symbol of the Inquisition's cruelty. Victims would be unclothed, often with spikes piercing their bodies, leading to slow and agonizing death. Similarly, the Judas chair was a contraption designed to stretch and manipulate the body into painful positions, often combined with other devices to maximize suffering. The torture chambers also developed psychological methods to induce despair. False promises of mercy or confession, threats against loved ones, and threats of immediate death or eternal damnation were common. Victims, often innocent or mistaken for others, faced a relentless barrage of fear tactics designed to break their will. Many gave false confessions, confessing to crimes they did not commit, simply to end their suffering. Brutality was further heightened by the scale and duration of these tortures. Sometimes victims would spend days or even weeks subjected to escalating forms of pain, wearing down their resistance. The infamous auto da fe ceremonies publicly displayed confessions, often extracted through torture, and served to reinforce the terror and authority of the Inquisition to the observing masses. These spectacles were as much about punishment as they were about intimidation, transforming the chambers into theaters of horror meant to serve as a warning to all. The numbers are staggering. Thousands of victims suffered in these chambers, with many lives utterly destroyed by the relentless cruelty. For centuries, these sites existed only in whispers, sketches, and the chilling testimonies of victims and witnesses. However, recent discoveries have begun to uncover tangible evidence, remnants that vividly illustrate the brutal reality faced by those accused of heresy. One of the most compelling sources of evidence comes from archival materials, trial transcripts, confessions, and records of auto da fe punishments. These documents reveal a systematic approach to torture and dissect how fear was cultivated to extract confessions or force acquiescence. Many of these records are meticulous, detailing the devices used, the duration and intensity of tortures, and sometimes even the psychological torment inflicted on victims. Such evidence dispels myths of random cruelty, exposing a calculated regime designed for control and intimidation. In the last few decades, archaeology has played a crucial role in unearthing physical evidence of the Inquisition's horrors. Excavations in former inquisitorial prisons and sites associated with the tribunals have uncovered remnants of torturous devices, iron shackles, chains, and parts of the infamous rack, highlighting how standardized these tools were in their relentless brutality. Some sites yielded personal artifacts like torn clothing, remnants of documents, and even blood-stained fragments, humanly tangible links to victims long dead. Perhaps the most striking recent find was at a site believed to be a prison connected to the former Holy Office in a Spanish city. Archaeologists discovered a series of small, dark chambers, likely holding cells, along with a trove of torture implements buried beneath the floor. These tools ranged from the traditional rack and the strappado apparatus to more obscure devices like the Judas chair, a device that suspended victims by their arms in an agonizing position. The careful analysis of these objects confirms what historical records describe, an environment of sustained, calculating cruelty. The discovery of skeletal remains further enhances understanding. At one site, archaeologists unearthed the bones of victims, showing signs of repeated trauma consistent with torture, fractured vertebrae, cramped and broken limbs, and skull injuries. Researchers have correlated these injuries with historical accounts of brutal methods, affirming the physical toll exacted inside those shadowy chambers. Additionally, the unearthing of personal artifacts such as battered rosaries, worn clothing, and personal writings indicates that victims endured prolonged suffering before succumbing or confessing. These artifacts humanize the victims, transforming abstract horrors into tangible stories. They serve as stark reminders that behind every piece of historical record, there was a human being subjected to unimaginable torment. Modern forensic analysis also sheds light on the conditions within the chambers. Soil tests from excavated sites reveal traces of blood, hair, and other biological material from victims. Chemical analysis of these residues helps confirm the presence of recent injuries, reinforcing the brutality inflicted there. This scientific layer complements documentary evidence and brings to life the grim reality of these clandestine prisons. It is important to distinguish myths from verified fact. Popular depictions sometimes exaggerate or romanticize the cruelty of the Inquisition. However, the physical and documentary evidence grounds our understanding firmly in historical reality. These findings close the gaps left by centuries of silence, enabling us to see the extent of the systematic brutality enacted in the name of faith and justice. In sum, archaeological and forensic discoveries are revolutionizing our comprehension of the Spanish Inquisition's horrors. They serve as powerful tools for remembrance, reminding us of a dark chapter where fear and cruelty reigned supreme. Through these revelations, we acknowledge the victims' suffering and reinforce the importance of safeguarding human rights today. The legacy of the Spanish Inquisition's brutality extends far beyond its collapse in the 17th and early 18th centuries. Its violent methods, systemic repression, and the climate of fear it fostered left an indelible mark on Spanish society and the broader Western world. In the immediate aftermath, communities were fractured, trust shattered, and countless lives destroyed, not only through executions and tortures, but also by the deep psychological scars inflicted upon victims and their families. The fear of being falsely accused of heresy or heresy-related crimes permeated everyday life, leading many to suppress their beliefs, silence dissent, or live in persistent paranoia. One of the most lasting repercussions was how the Inquisition shaped perceptions of justice and authority. Redirecting faith into fear, the tribunal's use of torture as a tool of interrogation eroded the principles of fair trial and due process. Instead, confessions obtained under duress became the basis for executions, branding the system as inherently unjust. This distortion of justice fostered skepticism toward religious and secular authorities and contributed to an environment where accusations alone held lethal weight. Such practices cast a long shadow on subsequent legal systems, prompting debates about human rights that continue today. Moreover, the Inquisition's relentless targeting of Jewish, Muslim, and alleged witch populations contributed to enduring ethnic and religious tensions within Spain. Many Jews were expelled or forced to convert, leading to a significant diaspora that spread across Europe and the New World. Families torn apart by accusations faced social ostracism and violence, fostering a climate of intolerance that persisted long after the official end of the tribunal. This historical trauma echoes in present-day discussions about religious tolerance and the dangers of fanaticism, reminding us how state-sponsored persecutions can destabilize entire societies. Intellectual and cultural consequences also stemmed from the brutality of the Inquisition. During its height, academic and artistic expression were heavily censored, stifling progress in science, philosophy, and arts that challenged dogma or presented controversial ideas. The fear of punishment for heresy suppressed innovation and free thought, setting back intellectual development for generations. Even after the tribunal's decline, its chilling legacy served as a warning to future thinkers, a reminder that authority could silence dissent and suppress truth. Importantly, criticism of the Inquisition grew over time, fueled by Enlightenment ideals emphasizing reason, individual rights, and the separation of church and state. Thinkers like Voltaire and Enlightenment philosophers condemned the tribunal's abuses, laying the groundwork for modern notions of justice and human rights. The outrage over its cruelty helped inspire reforms in legal systems and contributed eventually to the secularization of European societies. Yet, even as its influence waned, the scars of the Inquisition persisted, embedded in collective memory and institutional practices that still grapple with issues of religious tolerance and state power. The manner in which the Inquisition operated, meting out terror under the guise of maintaining religious orthodoxy, serves as a cautionary tale for future generations. Its history forced societies to confront the devastating consequences of fanaticism, violations of human dignity, and the dangerous dehumanization that can occur when cruelty is justified by ideology. Today, scholars, human rights advocates, and governments vigilantly study this dark chapter to ensure such horrors are never repeated. Gallingly, the echoes of those brutal practices still remind us of our shared responsibility to defend justice, uphold human rights, and never allow fear to override compassion. In contemplating the Inquisition's brutal legacy, we are compelled to ask, how do societies reckon with their darkest chapters? Memory, education, and acknowledgement are crucial in fostering understanding and preventing the repetition of horrors. Recognizing the atrocities committed and the suffering endured is essential not only for remembrance, but also as a moral compass guiding present and future actions. The enduring lesson is simple yet profound. True justice must be rooted in mercy and fairness, never in violence and terror. Deep within the shadowy confines of the Spanish Inquisition's most secret chambers lay a nightmare realm where pain was forged into an art form of unimaginable brutality. The torturers, trained to wield devices of suffering with cold precision, transformed institutional cruelty into a terrifying spectacle of human misery. Among the most infamous tools was the rack, a device that stretched victims' limbs until bones threatened to snap, all in the name of uncovering truths that often bore little relation to reality. Yet the rack was only one facet of a sinister arsenal. Another brutal method was the strappado, where victims were suspended by their arms behind their backs, often with weights added to increase the agony. This technique not only inflicted excruciating pain, but also risked dislocating joints and tearing tendons. Waterboarding, a precursor to modern torture, was employed to induce drowning-like panic, leaving victims gasping for air as their screams echoed in the cold stone halls. But perhaps most harrowing was the use of fire and mutilation, stretching the limits of human endurance to extract confessions or punish perceived heresy. What made these methods truly terrifying was the psychological torment that went hand in hand with physical abuse. Victims were threatened with eternal damnation, told that their suffering was God's punishment for their sins, or coerced into false confessions to end their torment. Many believed that death was preferable to the endless suffering within these chambers, yet some endured willingly, broken spirits revealing the true power of fear. These stories blur the lines between guilt and innocence, illustrating how the chambers turned into machines of moral and spiritual destruction. The scale of the horror is staggering, thousands of victims over decades, many of whom were subjected to repeated sessions of torment. Entire families were torn apart, communities silenced by fear, as the Inquisition's reach extended deep into the fabric of society. The infamous auto da fe punishments, public executions promised to serve as warnings, were the ultimate culmination of this terror, a grotesque spectacle to reaffirm the power of the Church and state. Modern discoveries have shed new light on this dark chapter. Archaeological excavations unearthed remnants of torture devices, blood-stained implements, and skeletal remains bearing evidence of violent trauma. These tangible relics reaffirm historical accounts and dismantle countless myths, revealing that the cruelty was not exaggerated but rooted in systematic brutality. The climax of this cruelty horrifies because it fundamentally challenges notions of justice and human dignity. The Inquisition's chambers weren't merely institutions for seeking truth. They were arenas of organized terror where pain was wielded as a weapon to suppress dissent and conform societal norms. It was a form of domination so extreme that it rivals the imagery of hell itself, an inferno where souls were broken and bodies decimated under the guise of religious righteousness. In reflecting on these tales, one can only marvel at the depths of human cruelty and the importance of remembering such atrocities. It forces us to confront the capacity for evil when fanaticism and power collide, reminding us that safeguarding human rights requires vigilance and moral courage. The brutal history of the Spanish Inquisition's torture chambers serves as a stark reminder of the depths human cruelty can reach when fueled by fanaticism, dogma, and a disregard for human dignity. Reflecting on this dark chapter is essential, not only to honor the victims, but also to ensure that such horrors are never repeated. Throughout history, societies have often been tempted to justify violence in the name of faith, justice, or cultural purity. The Inquisition's legacy highlights the catastrophic consequences of allowing fear, intolerance, and unchallenged authority to override moral considerations. One of the most important lessons from this chapter of history is the critical need for skepticism and accountability. The system of the Inquisition was built on procedures that suppressed dissent, silenced alternative perspectives, and relied heavily on confessions extracted under duress. These confessions, often false or exaggerated, were used to justify further persecution, creating a vicious cycle of violence. Modern justice systems emphasize fairness, transparency, and the presumption of innocence, principles that stand in stark contrast to the Inquisition's methods. Recognizing these differences underscores the importance of upholding human rights even amid conflicts or societal upheavals. Furthermore, the story of the Inquisition reminds us of the danger inherent in religious and ideological fanaticism. When faith is weaponized, it can justify atrocities that devastate communities and annihilate individual lives. The fervor of figures like Torquemada, driven by a mix of religious zeal and personal ambition, turns a spiritual inquiry into a campaign of terror. Contemporary society must remain vigilant against similar patterns, whether in political extremism, religious fundamentalism, or any ideology that denounces others as enemies or threats. Promoting critical thinking, education, and tolerance is vital to prevent the recurrence of such horrors. The archaeological discoveries and archival evidence unearthed centuries later help paint a more comprehensive picture of the brutality inflicted during the Inquisition. They serve as somber testimonials to the suffering endured by countless victims. These revelations challenge romanticized or mythologized narratives that sometimes attempt to downplay or justify past atrocities. Instead, they compel us to confront the reality. The systematic cruelty and suffering were not deviations but integral parts of the Inquisition's machinery. Remembering these truths encourages a collective responsibility to advocate for justice and compassion today. Equally important is recognizing the resilience of those who survived and the enduring human spirit. Though they faced unimaginable torment, many victims maintained their dignity, faith, or hope. Their stories remind us that even in darkness, the human desire for freedom, truth, and justice persists. By honoring their memories, we affirm our commitment to building a more compassionate world, one that learns from its darkest moments rather than repeating them. In the broader scope, the legacy of the Inquisition influenced the evolution of ideas about justice, tolerance, and religious freedom. The backlash against such brutality eventually fueled Enlightenment thinking, emphasizing reason, individual rights, and separation of church and state. These ideas laid the groundwork for modern human rights movements, serving as a stark contrast to the oppressive practices of the past. Recognizing this progression underscores the importance of continuous vigilance, education, and dialogue in safeguarding these values. Ultimately, comprehending the horrors of the Inquisition's torture chambers compels us to reflect on the moral responsibility we bear. How do societies remember these tragedies? Are they simply tales of the past or lessons that shape a present? By confronting uncomfortable truths, we foster empathy and a collective determination to prevent similar atrocities. Remembering the victims is not just about recounting history, it's about reaffirming our shared humanity and striving for justice, dignity, and compassion for all. The echoes of those dark days remind us that the greatest triumph lies in our ability to learn, forgive, and commit to a more humane future.